Welcome back, it's been a while. I ran into some setbacks editing my promised Desert Dunes biome, so I re-recorded the build utilizing some new features. This tutorial is a bit longer than my previous videos, but we cover a lot of ground. We'll be building a brand new Desert Dunes biome from start to finish. Enjoy! Alright, as always we start with a TaleSpire terrain. If you're still new to Houdini, you hit the tab menu. There is a TaleSpire category in here. A lot of times you'll see me just hit tab and start typing. Like I type in TERR to get the terrain, grab that. And there we have it. I'm going to call this Desert Dunes and immediately save it somewhere. I'll do a new folder, Dunes, and name this Desert Dunes. v1.01. Yeah, I immediately save it because when you go to build cache your terrain tiles, it needs to have a saved location. It'll warn you if you haven't saved your file. So here we go. Fresh terrain. Map setup. I'm going to set my terrain size to 200 by 200 just to give us some room. I like to make dunes fairly big. You can make them smaller. It's up to you. And then we jump right into the terrain network. And to get in there, you can either just double click on this node or go down to the edit portion of the node interface and hit edit terrain. Worth noting, my interface for Houdini is upscaled, so it makes it a little bit more stream friendly. So my screen looks a little cramped sometimes because everything's overscale basically. Go into edit terrain. And here we have our default network. And if you don't like these big boxes, if you've read them 100 times, you can get rid of them. The only things you really have to keep is the top and the bottom node of this network, those purple nodes. And we're just going to delete everything in this top section here, so we can start from scratch. Okay. You might get this error with new versions of Houdini. If you see this message pop up, this event queue dropping 7 events or whatever, it kind of messes up your Houdini session and you have to reload it. I think you can still save your file. I'm going to version it up just to make sure. And I'm just going to close this and start again. So open recent, and I can just pick up where we left off. Yes, okay, we're back. But yeah, if you try to continue on after you see that message, you will not have any fun. I like to have fun. We've cleared out the base contents of the network, and we're going to start anew. So for dunes, the first thing I like to do is create the profile of the dune. We do that with a height field pattern node. You can drop it right in line here. Here we have the ghosted image because we're viewing the very top network and this network. You go to this menu and hide other hide other objects, then it makes sure we're viewing just this network. So the pattern defaults to this star. We want to change it to a ramp. And down here, the ramp, we can go over this gear menu and select hill. And that starts to get us the shape that we want. You can adjust the height and how many times it repeats. That's the size. So you get how many iterations. So this is a 200 by 200 tile area. Depending on how many dunes you want to cross in that span, you would set this size to, I'm going with 70 here. The height is way too high. We'll set this somewhere around 10 to start with. I also want to adjust how smooth these are. These are too smooth. So you go down here to this ramp, and one of these buttons will open up this larger, and the other button will give you some more controls over the type of curve. I like to select the first, hold down shift, and select the last one. So it selects all these, and switch this from monotone cubic to B-spline. This allows us to put more points in here to give us the shapes we want. And it creates a nice spline slope. So you basically start adding points here to sculpt out the dune profile you want. And I put a couple at the top to give it a nice point. As you can see, this B-spline, it doesn't quite hit each one of these points, but it gives you a nice, smooth interpolation between them. And then you just kind of look at the shape in here and start seeing how you want it to work out. And you could have like one side slope more than the other if you wanted. to get like a very windy slope look. I'm not going to go that extreme. And that shape's actually looking pretty good. We can always adjust these later. That's the general profile I'm looking for. Now we need to add some noise on top of that. We want to distort by noise. Height field distort by noise. And here, you can see it starts distorting those waves into something else. That's a little bit too high frequency. Typically, I'll adjust the number of octaves. Dunes we want to be quite smooth. Take that down to 3 amplitude-wise. You can get pretty crazy with it. It's still too high frequency, so I'm going to adjust this element size up. Looking pretty good. I'll increase the amplitude a bit more. There we go. And then offset the noise. I typically always offset it. The noise when it's at 000, every time you drop one of these operators down, it's going to be at 0, and so you're going to get the same exact noise every time. So it's very good to go in and just tweak these numbers. And now we see a problem is that the edges of the map plateau out. We don't want these plateaus. The reason that's happening is because in this pattern here, it only goes to the borders of your height field. And when you distort it, you're pulling away from those borders, so it's just using the same value at the edge that there was. You can use a height field layer properties node. Place that down. It's working on height. Instead of border type streak, you can try repeat for this. Oh, that looks ugly as heck. Oh, I know why. Yeah, the issue is, since it's repeating, the value on this side has to be the same as the value on that side. So you might have to tweak with your center, how this centers back and forth, or the size or whatever to get rid of any funky ridges like that. And I don't know if there's an easy way around this. I did notice if not the size. Oh yeah, size might actually do it. Yeah, that one looks good, that one looks good. So yeah, I just basically stretched it out or narrowed it until those two values on the edges meshed up. Not ideal, but it works. We got a nice distortion happening on our dunes, but it's kind of plain looking because it's just one set of dunes. And what's really fun is when you have patterns that interfere with each other. So we're going to create a second distort. And just copy that distort, and we can move the offset value to somewhere else. Get a couple different looks. So we have one that looks like that, one that looks like that. And then we want to blend those together somehow. Now, just blending them straight together is not going to be very interesting, so I like to blend them with noise, and we can create a mask noise. Just type in noise. Select height field mask noise. And we're working on a separate chain here to create a mask that we're going to use to blend these two things together. Amplitude, we want definitely want to crank the element size down. Again, offset it. And you'll probably want to tweak this to get the exact look you want after we do this. I think I like Perlin noise for this better. It gives us some more defined shapes. And I'm going to crank the octaves down to 1, actually, for this, so it's nice and smooth. We'll see how that looks. Like I said, I might want to change it so we get a few more different patterns in here. I believe we want this a little bit more defined still, not as smooth. So you can pull up a height field remap node. Take the input min and max and crank them down so that it defines that a little bit more. It's working on height. Layer, you have to switch this to mask. Just type it in. There we go. So now we can more harshly define the regions we want to blend. And we also want to hit this clamp to minimum, clamp to maximum to make sure we don't have values that go below or over 1 in our final result. Because you'll get some weird blending results, not what you're intending. Then we need to blend those together with that pattern. To do that, there is a height field layer node. You put your first pattern into the first input, second pattern into the second input. And in this node, we do want to replace what's in there. And then for the third input is going to be that mask that we created. And now if we display that, we have some different patterns. Doesn't look that great yet, but we can tweak things and make it look better. It might just be up to like the noise patterns that we're feeding into it, right? Finding one that works well. And you can adjust both of those until you find something that looks cool. I'm seeing some hard lines that I don't quite like in here, so it might be best to blur the mask a bit. Height field mask blur. I'll crank that radius up 40 to give it a bit more of a smooth transition. You can always toggle a node off and on. There's this yellow flag. I saw this little crease here and a funky little crease over here. You know, a lot of this detail is going to be lost when you go to tiles, but you know what they say, garbage in, garbage out, right? So, yeah, that's not too bad. I might want to still play around with the different noises a bit to get a better result. And it might be our blending noise too. So we can go back to this mask and adjust the noise on that too to get some different patterns. Oh, like right there. That looks kind of cool. I like that. You have like two kind of overlapping noise patterns. I'm gonna go with that. Now at this point, we have these nice patterns, but all the dunes are the same height, and that's typically not what you want. So we can vary this whole thing by noise. Just a standard height field noise. Take that off our base terrain. So we want to vary our dunes by some noise. Crank the amplitude down quite a bit. Element size. I want some higher frequency, but I don't want as many octaves. Crank that down to like 3 or so. And as usual, we'll set our offsets to something random. And then I want to map this noise on top of there, but not that high. So we want to remap this, because this is nice to be able to visualize it, but then we want to remap it so we can control like how high and low are we actually going to affect the terrain. Go to remap, height field remap. You can compute range, which will automatically set up the inputs and outputs. So because what I'm wanting to do is here, I want to take the lowest areas and make it so it lowers the terrain by a set amount, and I want to take the highest areas and raise the terrain by a set amount. But it's kind of hard to know like what are your high and low ones. So you can compute range, and it'll give you these input min, input max automatically calculated for us. I want to remap those to what we want. And let's see, 0.5 to 1.5. So that's kind of an arbitrary number right now. And then we want to kind of multiply that with the existing dunes. This one goes from 0 to something, and then we'll multiply it by the results of this one. So we go to layer, height field layer, and set this to multiply. And I'm just going to make sure it only works on height. So now you can see the results here is it took that noise field and just slightly modified the heights of them so they're not all the same height. Yeah, the remapping can be a little bit confusing since like when you remap it you don't see it very well, but you're just mainly concerned with this final output that it's going to scale your results by. That looks pretty good. The only other thing that I like to add is just a little bit of overall height modification. So right now, our valleys are all at the same time. We've adjusted our peaks, but our valleys are still 0. We could have used an add operator on this, but I really was wanting to adjust the peaks, not the valleys, with that step. So now we can just create another noise that we just add to the complete thing. It's all about the noise. Height field noise. Again, we want to crank the amplitude. The amplitude on this I'm going to put very low. Again, octaves, since this is sand, there's not going to be much to the octaves. We're just looking for something very subtle. It's just to give a little bit of variation to the overall map. I'll just adjust the offset, and we'll call that done. And we add that onto our terrain. Height field layer again. And again, I just want to work on height only. I'm going to add that noise to the other noise. So now, if you want to toggle it, you can just hit the bypass on this. So you see just a slight variation. So that, let me actually bake this out to show you why I like to do that. I'm going to turn it off at first. I'm going to go all the way up to the top menu, and we're going to finally cook this out. Build cache terrain tiles. We've already saved it. I should probably save it again. Actually, you would probably want to save before you hit that button because, you know, that's one of the times where you could get a crash. So now I'm going to turn off the display of the height field terrain and turn on the tiles. So yeah, right now we do have grass and dirt. We're going to change all that. So this is without that extra noise, and it's not bad, but like I do not like completely flat areas. Like this is very flat, very flat. Now for gaming, maybe you like that. I like to add in noise, so it's your flavor. So if we turn that back on, so there's a slight variation, go back up to the top, and we will calculate the terrain tiles again. Boop, boop, boop. It thinks about it, and then adds it in. And, you know, I didn't add a lot, but it just, to me, it just adds a little bit of extra variation that makes me happy. So that's why I do it. So we're going to say, for now, this is the terrain that we want, right? Now we need to go into the biomes and start editing the biomes. So you go to Edit Biomes. There, it starts off with the simple biome. I'll turn on the display of that one. It does have rocks and trees and grass and dirt. We want to change all of that, but the simple biome, it's pretty basic, so there's only a few assets in here, so it's a good starting point. So you go to Edit Biome Objects as the first step. We can go in here and start changing the existing ones or adding what we want. A simple way is just to, like, you know, change the grass tiles to sand tiles. You know, these are already in here set up. We're not going to use grass for this, so we might as well just change them. You want to swap out these tiles. So go to grass one by one. You can switch the type of asset that you're looking for. So nature, and I think that's desert grown one by one. And we can view that to make sure. Sure enough, it is a desert tile. That's where having those textured tiles on really helps. So you can kind of actually see those. We'll rename it to be nice. We'll call it sand one by one, and this one is sand. There we go. These network boxes are the categories of things that you want to scatter or place, and those we'll be creating some more of those later on from scratch. And then we want to do the same thing with this one. Nature, desert ground 2. Hey, look at that. I don't know why the texture didn't pop up. Sometimes a reboot will fix that. We don't need a second tile on here. I'm going to delete that. And then we'll call this one sand as well. We have cliffs and trees. We're not going to need the trees. I might just delete that one. Alright, go back up. Whenever you modify the biome, it's a good idea to click this refresh biome, especially the objects. Now we'll go into tiles. Edit tiles. This is where the grass and the dirt was set up before. We broke things because we renamed those categories, but we're going to switch this to sand tiles. We're going to change this to sand tiles 1 by 1 and sand tiles 2 by 2. And hey, look, the textures are working now. Great. I don't want this dirt, so I'm just going to rewire this, both of those up to there. I'm just delete dirt. So all we have now is sand tiles. And go back up to the top. We have cliffs in here, but I don't want the cliffs placed the way these ones are placed. We're going to change that. So go into Edit Props. For now, I'm just going to hold down Y and cut these connections so there is no props getting placed. I might actually just delete these. Sure, why not? We'll just delete all those. Oh, we have no props whatsoever in here. Go back up to the top. We have our dunes with just tiles. All you have to do now is potentially export it just to test it out. I'm going to display the slab bounds. We can probably get by with a pretty big I'm going to try 100 slab bound. You don't have to get the slab index range, but it gives you a good idea how many slabs are going to be. I'm going to turn off use registration marks because I'm going to use the multi-copy mod. There. And then we switch over to TaleSpire. We'll create a new board. I always like to zoom out, go up high, so we can see it happen. Set the fog down, apply, and then we paste it down. And this is a good time to check, like, scale-wise. Is this the scale you want? Put down a mini. Sure. I think this is a good size. Gives you some climbability and some range, so you can have some versatility. Not looking too bad, but it's very, very blocky, right? It's not very Dune-like. This might be fine because it performs really well. My GPUs aren't screaming at me or anything, which is nice. But I like to add in nice slopes and variations of that sort. Let's get into adding some props to make this look a little bit better. So we go back into Edit Biomes, Edit Biome Objects. We'll look at our cliff. I'm going to pull in a brand new cliff. We'll create it from scratch. I'm creating a TaleSpire object node. That's any object that we want to place, we need one of these. It's a prop, and we're going to go into nature. It's the cliff face. Actually, no, that's right. There's a new rock. Let me go back to TaleSpire. Previously, before the new rocks arrived, I found that if you place cliffs in with the sand, it kind of blends in fairly well color-wise, right? And you can kind of break up the blocky patterns. But there's these new rocks. This one seems to blend in even better color-wise. So I was going to play around with using those instead. So I had to figure out what that one's named. Okay, there's another way you can do it. You can just use it as a slab. You don't have to figure out the name of it, right? So you just plop one down, and you copy it, and then go back to here, and instead of prop, just go to slab import, paste that in there. And this is how you import the other ones too, by the way. Decode slab, and then you have that rock. And I don't have a proxy model for it, so it's a bounding box. That's basically what we want. And then we can lower it down so that this green thing is the ground plane, and we can kind of lower it down so that it is right around the ground plane. And we might want to adjust this ground level later on. We'll kind of set that there for now. And now we go back up and go into Edit Props, and we want to place that thing on our slopes. So we have our empty prop network. First thing we want to do is a height field mask by feature. Height field mask by feature. Alright, so we want to mask by slope, and we need to dial in the slopes that we want to put our things on. I always like to, when I'm looking for high slopes, I typically don't want this tapering off on the high end over here, this ramp. So I get rid of that last keyframe so that you're not masking the low slope, but you're masking everything above the values that you dial in. So we want to basically dial in the portion of the slope that we want to place our smooth rocks on. To smooth out the grid tiles, at least. We'll start with that. That looks fine. And then we just put down a TaleSpire scatter node. The first input is the terrain in. The second input is our mask. And this shows us that we're scattering stuff in that area. Then we want to select the scatter set, which is cliffs. And then it gives us our nice little bounding boxes. Why is there stuff going off the edge of the map there? Okay, the mask by feature is detecting the edge of the map as a slope. So that's another case where we should put the properties node, the height field layer properties node, and it automatically fixed it. Yeah, we're just streaking that. Yeah, anytime you see issues at the edges of the maps, it's probably you have to pop down one of those layer property nodes. So now we're not scattering extra bits on those edges. There we go. We have stuff in there. I'm now going to actually turn back on so I show all objects so I can see the terrain and these objects at the same time. It gives us an idea of how high those should be and how many of them. Now, the bounding boxes aren't great. I have a feeling we're going to need a lot more, but we can always test it out, see what it looks like. So I'm going to wire up that scatter so that it goes to both the preview and the out nodes, and that's going to make it so it'll go into our terrain. I never turned on display props at this upper level, so those are now on. And then I'm going to hit the multi-copy slabs. Switch back to TaleSpire. I should just be able to undo this since I haven't made a lot of changes here. We're good. And there, we pasted. And you know what? That's actually not too bad. We could go way more dense. It definitely smooths out those hills. I should do one with and without just so we can see the difference. So let's paste another version of this. Yeah, so now we can get like a comparison of the two. And how, sure, they're rocks, but it's up to you which one looks more like dunes than the other one. The color blends in quite well. So we placed those on the sloped areas, but then you have, and this is, when I did this video before, this is where I ran into the issue. I had somebody asking, how do you hide these very low slope ridges? Because if you extend your slope for these other rocks to include these areas, you're just going to get way too many. And you might as well just not even have any sand at that point. I still like the sand because it still gives you that texture that pokes out. It's just more, it's not about completely hiding the ridges, it's just breaking up the patterns. You see that interference pattern on the dunes without the rocks. They call that Moiré. This Moiré pattern, those stripes that go through there. Those drive me crazy. You don't see those on this one. There's aliasing issues, but you're not seeing those patterns. The issue's still there, but it's not nearly as apparent. So, how do you now isolate just these areas to add more props in those areas? And I have a node for that now. Go into Edit Biomes, Edit Props, and yeah, like I was saying, you could, I'm going to go back over here and hide other objects again. You could extend these down in the lower sloped areas, but then you're just adding way too many props at that point. So now we'll just create another scatter node just to handle those things. So this one's, let's say we're happy with it, we can tweak it later. And now there's a new node. It should be in the TaleSpire options, and it is TaleSpire Height Field Tile Edge Mask. I know it's a long name. And what that does is it creates a mask around every tile edge, just like it says. I believe I do have to use that layer properties on this one too. Yeah, that helps. So we don't get the edges again. And now we get a mask that we can place those things on, but we don't want to also place them where we've already placed them. So you can basically take the existing mask that you did and invert that. So there's a height field mask invert, and then you multiply these two together with that layer node again. Height field layer. Oh, in this case, let's look at the options of this tile edge mask really quick. The most important thing here is this tile divisions. In order for this to work well, our height field had to be a higher resolution. Normally, I have it, height fields are voxel based, or kind of think of them as pixels. Voxels are like a 3D pixel, but a height field is actually just a two-dimensional voxel setup, so it's essentially pixels. I have it so 1 pixel equals 1 tile by default. Well, that's not high enough resolution to really mask out these, so there's this tile divisions. So here's the 1 tile, as you can see, it's just a blurry result. So by default, this upreses our height field 4 times. This can get memory intensive and slow for large maps, but for this size seems to work fine. So the default seems to work pretty good. We get pretty good definition. And then we have this edge smooth radius, which will basically, if you want like really sharp or smoother shapes around where you want to put the things. I have it default to 1. That gives you a little bit of a space around each tile edge. Then output uses mask resolution is basically, if you turn that off, you're going to go back to the original resolution, which we don't want. And then you can also just output the height of the tiles, so you can actually see there's the stair-steppy tiles from TaleSpire. We don't want that either. The defaults tend to work for this use case most of the time. Because we are increasing the resolution, though, when we combine these, like I want to multiply these two masks together, if I put the low-res one in first and have the high-res one in the second, and then we go to multiply, I'm going to make sure it's only on mask, it changes the resolution back down to the low-res, which I don't want. You have to put the tile edge mask in first. You can hit Shift-R to automatically swap the inputs, or you can just rewire it manually. Now we have those tile areas minus the sloped areas, and since the props have some space to them, I'm actually going to grow the mask from this. So there is a expand. Height field mask expand. So that basically takes the existing map, stretches it out further. I'm just going to do it by like 1, and then we can invert. That just makes it so it's not right up against those other ones, and should give us a bit better results. Now we just need to scatter more of those same rocks. So scatter. That goes into the second input, and we can go right at the top to give us scattering results, and we'll try just scattering the cliffs again. We might have to make a special set just for those. We'll see. One important thing I didn't hit was on the TaleSpire scatter nodes for this. For doing cliff-like things, turn off stick to surface tiles for these. That way they're not going to... Alright, let's look at that. That might have been impacting us before. Because it's going to stick them onto the actual tiles, where in this case we want the smooth slope. We don't want them on the tiles. So turn that off. I have to do that with this one as well. Stick to surface tiles off. We've got our cliffs selected. I'm going to merge that in with the other result. Preview. For these ones, we want it to fairly closely follow these lines, and right now there's just not enough density to fill those lines. That's why we want a different scatter node than our other one. And so we really want to crank up the density. We'll just put it up to like 20 for now, and now you can start to see it's following those lines. But we're also limited by the radius, so it tries to keep these away from each other. So let's try putting this down to like 0.5. There's a lot more, maybe 0.6. You can give that a try. You can also play around with this iterations, which tends to smooth out the results a little bit, the higher that goes. We are randomizing in yaw 180. That's good. Let's try that out, see what it looks like with it combined with everything else. There we go. I'm going to hit the copy. We're probably going to run into the copy issue. Yep, we've added more props, so now we can't get by with our slab size of 100 anymore. Let's try 80. Did that actually change anything? Oh, no. You gotta keep in mind this is the minimum slab size, so just cranking it down doesn't always do anything. So there, now we got 16 slabs. Hopefully that'll work. Multi-copy. Yep, it did. Go back to TaleSpire. I'll undo this one. One thing to keep in mind too, another thing to keep in mind I should say, every time you paste into a board, it adds to the object limit, which is 1 million. That does not get reset by by undoing the things. So eventually, if we stay on this board and keep undoing and pasting again, we're going to hit that limit. We're going to crash TaleSpire. So I am going to exit out of this board and come back in, just so we don't hit that limit. I think even just switching boards helps. So I'm just going to go back to the other board and come back into this one. Yeah, every now and then do that, and it resets that limit. I think I already copied it, so let's just try hitting paste. Yeah, okay, that's working. They're a little bit high. It is masking those, but they're a little bit too high or uniform, and also maybe going up a bit too high on there. So I might want to adjust my slope on the hills so there's not as many in those areas, and then maybe do some height variation on these guys so it breaks up that pattern a little bit more. Edit biomes, edit props. Turn off the show all objects again, hide all objects. Why am I seeing... Oh, I have this templated. Okay. All right, but what I am going to do is take this slope and extend it down on those hills a little bit further so that the other scatter grabs those sloped areas. And then that will also diminish these ones. And then I'm going to split up the cliffs. So I'm going to copy this network box for cliffs. And we're going to call this edge cliffs. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to add a little bit of extra variation to these ones so it breaks up those patterns a bit more. Let's go into the Y height vary. So every time this object gets scattered, it's going to randomize between these values. You have its position, but then a random Y height as well. I'm just adding that in so that on those ridges, it's not just everything at one level. There's going to be some that are lower than others. I have to update, hit refresh biome because I modified the objects. Back in edit props. Switch this to use edge cliffs instead. Preview. Now we will go back and export that again. Undo again, go back into build mode. Copy and paste, copy and paste. Okay, this is looking better. We don't have the crazy density up on here, and it's now breaking up those patterns. Yeah, I could definitely make some tweaks to this, but I think we're going to move on. So what do we do next? Let's add in some vegetation. Why not? Now, sand dunes, typically, they don't have vegetation. It can come up in like flat areas, right? So we can isolate the flat regions and then place props in them. I want to go a little bit further and kind of create a flatter area specifically that we're going to add in some vegetation, right? Alright, so we should pick an area that we want to, like an edge of the map. This edge is already a bit flat, so maybe I'll use this one. We're just going to make a flatter area for vegetation and such. So we'll go back into terrain edit and design a flatter area. To do that, we are going to use the pattern node again, height field pattern. We'll start a new branch over here. And we don't want that. We want ramp again. We want to operate on the mask instead of height. So you can type in mask or you can select it up here. The height, I believe we want to be 1 for mask. Yes. Because you're basically using this ramp and sticking it on there. So you want a 0 to 1 range on it. Ramp, but we don't want it to be linear. We want it to be concentric. So we have a circle. We can invert this ramp. So right now it goes from 0 to 1. We hit this little button here. It'll make it go from 1 to 0. We turn off repeat so that we can get a region that I want to build out. And then our size is going to be the size of that region. And then we can play around with the ramp to make that like a sharper transition, right? To move this, you can hit enter over here and actually slide it around. And I want that corner basically to be my flat area. Basically selecting an area to have a little bit more flatness to it. Then, maybe I do want that ramp to be a little bit more of a slope. And I'm going to make it larger. And then we want to distort that by noise, so use the old height field distort by noise again. And again, a lot of these come up, they want to operate on height, but I'm switching it to mask. And then we can dial in a little bit of a distortion. Again, I think we're running into the issue of it going off screen. So get in the habit of laying down those height field layer property nodes, I guess. Streak. I guess I didn't really do anything this time, but... Oh, layer property is working off a height. I want it to work off a mask. There we go. That's what I want. So I'm going to make that a little bit bigger again until it gets a portion of the map that I'm happy with making my flat area. Alright. So now we want to taper off this map by that mask. Easy way to do that would be just to, again, use a layer node, height field layer, go off of this. This is going to be our first input. This guy's going to be our second input and our third input, because we're going to grab the height from this and also the mask, right? And pretty much instantly, we're just replacing that with this flat area. Almost too flat, maybe. So we could add noise on top of that as well. So yeah, we'll just add in a bit of noise. Height field noise onto this guy. Oh boy. Of course, it's like way too big. We could probably use that same noise that we used for making the other one just slightly noisy, but yeah, this is fine. And that mask I'm going to blur up too, because we don't want the transition to be that tight. So height field mask blur. We've made our flat area. I think that's all we need for the terrain, so we have to recook that. Go back up to build cache terrain tiles. Anytime you edit the terrain network, you have to re-hit the build. Not biomes. You can edit the biomes without rebuilding. There. That's been updated. Now we want to calculate the flat areas, and we're going to do that in the biome. So edit biomes. And there's this newer section called Edit Biome Masks. We're going to use that. So the nice part about this section is, and you can read this little blurb here, is it's going to, when you create a mask in here, it's accessible both in the tiles and props areas. So you can use it in both places. And also it just kind of cleans things up so you're not doing those somewhere else. You can only add masks. You can't modify existing masks in here. It overwrites it with the original one. So we're going to mask by feature. And we're interested in just the low slope areas now. So I'm still going to crank this up on the end here, but we're going to invert the mask so that we're just looking at the lower sloped areas. And something I've done before too is make it so this ramp goes all the way, so you can really, so 0 to 1, and then these two values will make a little bit more sense that you're like where you want the min and max slope to be. So it's like I want to get this flat area, some of the mild hills and stuff, but not the big hills. That's okay. If we exclude any kind of sandy area, that might be good. So that, gives us our flat areas. It's also giving us these peaks. So in order to get rid of those, there's a very simple technique. You can shrink the mask. So height field mask shrink. Set the radius to something like 1, or wherever it gets rid of the features that you don't want, so like 2. But the problem is then you're shrinking your flat areas. But then you can also just copy that, place it right after the other one, and go from shrink to expand. So now it shrinks it and then it re-expands it. So it's basically just getting rid of the small features. And if it looks a little blocky here and there, no big deal. It doesn't matter. But that way, it's like, I don't want to put vegetation on the top of those peaks, which are sharp peaks, but we do want to put them in the valleys. So that should work. We've defined these regions. Now we need to name it something. There is a height field copy layer. So right now, it's named a mask. And the way height fields work is it's multiple height field volumes in one object. So you have your height and your mask are your two typical ones, but you can add any number of extra layers you want. So we're going to copy this mask layer into our, we'll call it the flats area, just to be fairly descriptive. So now we went from mask to flats area, and I could just merge that straight into the out and it will work. What I like to do is keep my development of extra mass off to the side and then use a height field layer node to copy that back into the main stream. So first input is straight out of that terrain in, the second input is here, and then we just basically copy that name again. But you can copy this flats area, paste it in here, so that now you've copied that layer into that and it goes out. But here we can see all the volumes that we have. We have height, mask, snow, dirt, default biome, and the flats area. All of these, height, mask, snow and dirt were created in the terrain network. Default biome is created by the system, so it knows which biomes are available. There'll be one of those for each biome, and then we've added in our flat area. So we know it's there, and now we go back up. Now when we're in our tiles and props areas, we can work off of those as well. And let's say in the flats area, we want different tiles too. So instead of just the straight up sand, I want to mix in sand with the other sand type tiles, right? These guys, like mixing in some like stony ones in with it, only in the flat areas, right? So to do that, again, we could either look up what that tile ID is. I'm just going to copy that one and then go back into Houdini, go up into, oh, you know what? I'm going to mess it up because I'm going to copy something in Houdini. I'm going to have to recopy that node. That's okay. We'll go into Edit Biome Objects. We have the sand 1x1. Those are fine. They don't have those versions of it. But I want to copy this network. And we'll call this Flat Sand 2x2 tiles. So we have the sand 2x2. I'll copy that one. And then we want to load in that other one. You could copy and paste it by going to slab import, or just go back to tiles, nature, and then find it. It's one of these road ones. So since we can't see the texture, we'll just go to slab import. That's weird. It's got a prop in there. Oh, look. So if I switch back and forth, it works. So it's not road 1, road 2. Here we go. It's road 2. Glitchy. I'll need a button or maybe something that, however it's refreshing there, it knows to refresh this. But yeah, that's the tile I want. So we have our sandy road that we're going to add into the mix. We'll just keep those even, right? What I'm talking about here is the scatter weight. If you want more of one prop in a group, you make its weight higher. If they're even, they're going to get even distribution. We have our flat sand 2x2s. We'll go back up into our tiles network. So just a refresher on how tiles work. It's kind of an overlay system. So the first one, we put tiles everywhere. Don't use a mask on this. You can, but I recommend against it. So no input, and then you create another tiler to modify those tiles, and that one uses masks. So we take the results from the sand tiles and put that into the next tiler, and then for this one we want to access the masks, so we put it into our height field in, and then we can select what we want to put on and where. We just created that new mask, flats area, so that's where we want to place these new tiles. And we're going to take sand 1x1 tiles, because we don't have any different 1x1 tiles, but we're going to take the flat sand 2x2 tiles. And then if we wire up both of these into that, we can now see we have those things mixed in. And now it looks like there's too many of them. And it's only in the flat areas, which is cool. I actually do want to make it so that these are less. Maybe about half as much. And that's what's nice about having this tile preview in Houdini. So we're going to go back into Edit Biome Objects. And for the sand road, I'm just going to put it down to 0.25 instead of 0.5. That should give us half as many. And it does appear like it worked. So that's the tiles portion of that. Now let's move on to the props portion of it. And this is where we're going to import some objects. Edit Biome Objects. And now here's where we want to create a new category of things to scatter. So let's go back to our assets page. So what I typically do, I dev out all the assets that I want to create using little dioramas like this. This was a generated terrain that I then added in like oasis stuff and vegetation. And then based off of that, I break out the things that I want to make as assets. These are the assets that I created for the high desert. This takes the longest to do, is creating all these things. And what I typically do is I take a 1x1 tile and place it out so I have a nice center, so I can see the center, and then I start building my assets based off of that. The tiles are not going to be in the final asset, but they're a way to place things properly. So we want to take all these and place them into Houdini. So you create a new network box. You can add network box right here, or you can see here you can do Shift-O to create it. Place it where you want it to go. There's going to be a lot of them in here, so I'm going to make this a bit bigger. And we're going to call this, we're just going to call it trees. Put down your first TaleSpire object node, and we're just going to call this tree 01. So we're going to switch that from prop to slab import. And then all we have to do is copy our slab. I'll start with this one, this little guy here. Let's go down the rows. So once it's in your hand, you can drop it and then switch back to Houdini, paste it in there, hit decode slab, and now view it. So we've imported our prop. Of course, it's got the tiles in there, and we don't want the tiles, we just want the props. But the tiles allow us to place those props by clicking this Remove Tiles button. It now takes the tiles out of the equation and places them. There's another object that's being displayed. Let me turn that off. The default mode for when you remove tiles is to center to the top of the tiles, and that's exactly what we want. It'll center it, and it places the top of the tiles at the ground level. So that way, it should look very similar to this when it gets used in TaleSpire. It's just that we're not using the tiles that were present. Now we can kind of use this as a template for copying the rest of them. Another thing is, like, there's a lot of sets of props out there on Tales Tavern and other thing. If you're using somebody else's creations, I recommend on your object, there's this slab author field, and you can basically put like the name of the person and a link to the source that you got it from, like some link on Tales Tavern. When you're exporting it, you can access that stuff. Like, I don't have a specific page for this, but you could just point them to like a specific set of assets. But right now we'll just copy my user profile and paste that in here. So anytime you use those assets, you can give that person attribution to the map if you publish it. If you plug those attributions that I talked about on the main terrain node, there is an attributions tab. It gives you this little text area, but you can generate them. So it goes through the map and it finds all of the attributions that you put on your geometry, and then it generates this for you. You can just copy and paste that and stick it in, like when you publish a map and you know who created assets. Alright, so we have tree 1, and now we're going to use this as a template to paste out the rest of them. So I'm going to basically just I'm going to lay it out exactly how it's laid out in Houdini, or I'm sorry, in TaleSpire, so that I know exactly what those assets are. Oh, I had 2 rows of 3, and then 2 rows of 4, and this one guy. Okay, so I'm keeping my numbering. So that way, visually, I can tell which one is which in case I want to replace one, tweak it a little bit, and each one of them now has that author name and stuff in it, and it's ready to go. Alright. And you can turn that isolation mode on if it helps. You just have to make sure to hit decode slab each time. Okay, so we've imported all of our trees, and now we will stick them in the props area, right? Edit props. I might want to clean this up a little bit so we know what's going on. I mean, I like to make it so none of my lines cross over if I can help it. That's never truly the case. Yeah, there's just situations where like you're using something from here, this is using something from there. And you could even put a network box around these, so if you select a bunch of nodes, you hit Shift-O, it will place the box around those and you'll label it. Another tip, if you hit C while you're in the network, it gives you a little color pane. So you can say, like, colorize that thing. Shift O, colorize. You can also hold down Alt and click on lines and drag across them to add this little dot for organization. Alright, so that's our two different cliff areas. Now we want to create our trees. We first have to import that mask from the flat areas. So to do that, we again use height field copy layer. And it should be in here now, flats area. Destination we want to be mask. So now we've imported that mask so we can place things on it. And we've already got our props. I never updated after I added those props, so we'll see if this actually works. TaleSpire scatter. The first input is our base terrain. The second input is our mask. And then scatter set as trees, which is missing because I forgot, like I said. Gotta go here, refresh biome. Should re-import that stuff. So if I go back in here, we have trees. Oh, lots of trees. Alright, let's go over our scatter node quickly here, make sure everything's set the way we want it. We're scattering trees, we're sticking to surface, yes. Density using mask layer, yes. Most of the defaults should be fine. We're going to want to play with density and outer radius, and everything else should be fine. We want each one to be randomized 180 degrees in either direction. So all that's good. It's looking very uniform, and we definitely don't want that. First thing we do is add some noise, again, to break up. We don't want just trees everywhere. You could even hand paint masks if you want, but we will add in height field mask noise. And here's where, again, I can use that Alt, hold down, gather up all those so that everything for this operation kind of comes from that little node here. Working off of our base terrain. That keeps it all nice together. Again, tweak the element size, amplitudes should be fine for these trees because I'll end up remapping this noise anyways. I'm thinking a better way to do this. Instead of using mask by noise, I'm going to use one of the new nodes that I created, the pocket noise. We'll keep this here, but yeah, you can totally use mask by noise to set up a pattern for how you wanted to place the trees. So let's try this TaleSpire height field pocket mask, which is a new node that I created. Enable that. So it basically just places little splotches of things around. Right? You can use the mask that we created here in the second input to make it so the pockets only go in those areas. They're just spheres that get placed randomly in those areas. You can change the seed and it puts them in different places. You can change their size and some noise that gets applied to them. And the density, how many get placed. So if you just want a few little pockets of trees, so you can either adjust the seed to get something that you like. This is a nice way to get just like little scattered outcroppings of things. And so we'll experiment that with the trees. You might still want to add noise onto that. First I want to distort them. You'll distort by noise. And again, you have to switch this to mask. So we're only distorting those. Again, it's having that issue for the borders, layer properties, mask, streak. There we go. And now I want it to kind of taper off from that, so I don't want just a solid line of where the trees are going, because if we were to feed that in there right now, we just get this block of trees. So you can either blur that out, or I do have that new TaleSpire height field mask distance. So the way this works, it takes your mask, and then it can calculate the distance away from that mask. And you can put a ramp on there. You have inside mask, which will calculates the distance you are inside the mask. So the higher the value is basically the further away you are from that mask. You can do outside mask, which does the same thing for the outside. And you can invert it so that goes the opposite direction. So that might be what you want. You can do in and out, which gives you the distance away from the edge in any direction. But for this, I believe I want the last one, which is continuous. Continuous means you can kind of go in and out, but they're going in the same direction, right? So then you can really kind of tailor, and I still have invert on, I'll turn that off. So now I can kind of tailor the feathering of where those things are, both inside and outside the mask. Basically, the deeper red that is, there's going to be more dense, and the more white it is, it's going to be less dense. That looks pretty good, and I want to clamp the output to be from 0 to 1. Because these numbers will go above and below 0, and they're very handy for certain things, but in this case, I want them clamped. And now if we feed that into the scatter, it still doesn't look like they taper off very much, so I think we have to adjust our density down further. So the lower the density, now it's not very apparent, but there is more in that center than there is on the outside. If you want to further make that apparent, you could put a ramp on this. Use ramp. Now you can see how I made the concentric lines of that. What is that thing? The Zen Garden, which I have an example file for that. But right now I want to clamp to the ramp. And then we could make a slope in here. I go into that B-spline again and kind of just making a nice slope. So here we can kind of tweak the density, kind of a curve, how it falls off until we get it the way we like it. So we'll just merge that in with the output, hit preview, all the way at the top. There we got our vegetation in there. So let's export this and see what it looks like. Multi-copy slabs. And a paste. So there we go. And yeah, we got these rocks sticking up here. Ignore those. What I like to do is have it, like for this desert, intersperse our little dead trees in here as well, right? So I made dead trees. We got to import those. What I would like to do is on the fringe of this, add in dead ones. And then maybe it overlaps a little bit so you get a few in here as well. Edit biome objects. We have our trees, and I'm going to create Shift O to create a new box for dead trees. Again, we'll use this as a template. We'll call it dead tree 1. Go back to our assets. Just add 8 of those. Copy that first one. Decode should all be set up, and we just need to copy it out, add 2 in that first row, 3 in the next, and another 3 in that last row. So we'll do the copy thing again. Alright, we have dead trees. Go back up, refresh biome, go and edit props. So now we just want to expand this area. We can just use this existing distance mask, copy it, and just tweak those values so it goes out further. So we have that and that. And we could even exclude that from the inside, but we might not have to. We'll see how this goes. So I want basically the fringe outside of this to be dead trees, right? So we'll copy this scatter. We'll use this as the input instead. We'll switch this to dead trees. But we don't want all the dead trees to intersect with the live trees. So that's where the second output comes into play. If you take the second output from one scatter node and plug it into the first input of another scatter node, it's supposed to avoid putting stuff in the same places as the other ones. Let's go back to edit biome objects. Each object, I'm going to select all so I can only display one thing. Okay. There's a circle around each object. This is a footprint of the space that this thing occupies. It's to keep other things from scattering into it. It's not working properly right now. Wait, what? Not working? That's not right. I couldn't let that one slide. Future me here. I've fixed the issue with footprints, and I'm going to take over to kind of splice this up for you. So the footprints do work. You can adjust them here, just like I just showed. You can select all of them together, and adjust them all at one time, or there's a bit of an easier way. So if we go back into edit props, you're going to see this 0.1 node in the remainder of this video. This was me getting around the footprint not working. So I had plugged that in, put a value there, but we can just get rid of that. We'll bypass that. Now, the easier way is on this TaleSpire scatter node. Under the scattering settings, there's a setting for incoming footprint. If you adjust this, it's a scaler on top of those other footprints. So you can dial in how far away you want the things being scattered in this node to be away from the ones that are coming in the main input here. So I'm going to set that to 3.2 because that's what I did in the rest of the video. And now I will hand it back to past me to finish this up. Now, we probably don't want this, but once we combine them, sometimes I do another merge node just to merge similar things together before I merge them into the main branch, like that. But you could also then create another preview node just to look at just those things combined. And another thing on the dead ones, I don't want them to be as populated. So I'm going to crank the density down to like half that. So we should get some intermixed with the existing ones, yes. And then it'll just be dead ones on the outside. I'm going to make it even less. There we go. This is looking fairly decent here. I'm going to export it again. Go back up. Multi-copy them slabs. There. That's basically working the way I wanted to. So now we have our nice live vegetation, and on the outskirts of that, we have the dead ones. It makes things feel a little bit more natural. It's not just like random everywhere. You know, it's like you're building in rules of how to place things. And sure, we have some up on top of these hills. Maybe they just took root there. You could base it off of height if you didn't want those in there. You know, further refine these areas, but this is fine for me for now. All right, so the last thing I want to do is create like little random rocky outcroppings, because that was something in my high desert map that I did that I really liked. All right, so let's go back into Houdini, and we're going to create some little random piles of rocks in here. We're going to go back into Edit Biomes. We want to add in these rocks, Edit Biome Objects. So we have these cliffs. They're using the other rocks, so I'm going to create another network box. Shift-O. Call it Rock. Rock Outcrop. And then we're gonna, it's a prop, we're just gonna use that cliff for this. Nature. Cliff face. Our favorite rock. That's all we need. Refresh biome. I have these development tools that you'll see sometimes. I keep forgetting to turn my dev mode off when I'm doing these streams. Then we go to edit props. Get rid of that noise node, we didn't need it. I'll group off all this stuff. Shift-O again. Now some people like to use these network boxes. There's a feature where you can collapse the entire box, and it collapses it out of the way so you don't see it. But if you have a really complex network and you've designed it easily enough to get like these things in and out of the way, you can collapse these down, and anything inside it just kind of gets out of the way for the time being. I don't typically do that. I want to use that pocket mask. It's going to be very similar to what we did with this other one. I've already got this layer out here. I'll move this outside of the box, so that way I know I'm going to share this between boxes, and I'll rewire this so it's up there too. So, because I want to use this flat area again to where I want to add my rocks in. And I'm going to use that pocket mask again. Light field pocket mask. So, we can scale those down. We can keep them a certain distance away from each other if we want. This outer radius will make it so they're not close to each other. In this case, I don't care if they're close to each other. Crank up the density, crank it down, change your seed. Now, one thing I have done with these nodes is there's this randomized seed per node. If you were to copy this node, you'll see the results are different between the two. It's essentially using the whole naming path to that node as a random seed. If you don't want that and you want identical results, you can turn those off on both nodes, and it's just the seed. But yeah, that's a way to make it so you can use the same nodes over and over again without having to worry about the actual seed. So yeah, here's some little areas we want to put some rocks. We will add some noise amp to each one of those shapes. And then I'm going to use that distance, height field, mask distance node again. This time I'm just going to do an outside mask and invert it. And just give a slight little... I mean, you can kind of use this to feather the edges without blurring the shape, which is nice. And that's all I really wanted for this. I want to get a little bit of a smooth area there. And now we could just scatter rocks right on there, but they're going to be flat, right? They're going to scatter to this surface. So we can use that noise to then make a little hill, essentially, that those rocks get scattered on to make those outcroppings. Height field layer node. And for this, I'm going to plug all three into the same thing. Think of it as a compositing operation, right? So you have source A, source B, and then the thing you want to use to affect those two things, right? Which is the mask. So in this case, they're all the same, but the base is the first input, the layer is the second input. So all we have to do is, you have to clamp the output on this distance node. So now when we adjust the layer offset, it's going to raise just the areas inside the mask. And then we could add some noise to that to make it a little bit bumpier. You could add the noise before that, or you can add it after. Either way. If you add it after, you would just use the mask again. We can do that. Just plug that mask in there so they're both using the same mask. Oh, I added mask noise instead. I want height. Maybe center the noise. Yeah, the problem with adding noise is you get into these situations, right? Where it's pushing it down instead of up. I don't need a lot of it, so we're just making a very fine-tune adjustment on the noise. There might be better ways to handle it, but I think this is actually going to work. So now we have a new height that we're dealing with. We're not scattering on the tiles anymore. We're going to scatter directly onto this height instead. We still use the TaleSpire node for that. TaleSpire scatter. Normally we're using the incoming height. When we want to scatter on tiles and stuff, it's best to use that original node. But in this case, these rocks aren't associated with tiles. They're just going to be their own thing. So just kind of plug them directly into that. Our mask can be that same source because we have our mask set up in there. And now we select our rock outcrops. Stick to tile surfaces on. So even though we've scattered it onto this, the TaleSpire scatter node automatically wants to stick these on the tile directly underneath it. And in this case, we don't want that. So that's why it flattened out. So we turn that off, and now they're scattered into the air, essentially. Preview, TaleSpire preview node. And then we can actually show all objects too, so we can see what those look like. They're giant. And they're also floating. In this case, since we're only using these to create these outcroppings, you could just put down a standard Houdini transform node. Oop, you can't attach stuff to a preview. It messes things up. Okay, so I put a transform node in here, and you can just move them up and down. That's acceptable with props. You can't do this with tiles. The other way is to not use that transform node and just go back into your objects and adjust the ground level. Oh, I never added that into the output. Merge that in. And then when I go up to edit objects, I can still see it because I'm showing all objects instead of hiding. So yeah, in here you can adjust the ground level. It's not as fast because it's going through the whole system. A couple different ways to do that. These rock outcroppings are giant. Let's go back into edit props. And now we can adjust that pocket mask. Let me turn this off so I can see them. These are just way too big. So we can scale them down. Some of them might actually disappear. And then, yeah, I might actually want them smaller than that even. I'm going to call this done. We're probably going to, next time I do this, I'll probably tweak this a little bit and make these outcroppings a bit better. But this gets us close to where I want this to be. I'm going to copy this, see what it looks like. These are not nearly as big as I thought they would. So yeah, this is actually looking nice. So we have these little outcroppings that are in just the valley areas. We have our vegetation. We have some dead stuff. We have some nice dune slopes. We've covered the edges with props to hide the tile edges in most cases. Like, I'm totally fine seeing an edge here and there. It doesn't bother me. Some people it really bothers. You can crank up the level of detail on these things. You know, tweak it to your heart's content. There's really nothing you can't do. It just takes time and learning the tools. That wraps up the Desert Dunes biome. This completed board and the assets used to make it are available on Tales Tavern. Check the links in the description. Subscribe to my channel to be notified for future tutorials. I have a few more videos planned, one showcasing sub-biomes, and another where we'll build upon this map by creating a desert oasis biome. Take care, and we'll see you next time.